It had only been a few days since the outbreak began, but for Sarah, it felt like a lifetime. The world had shifted overnight from bustling cities and the hum of everyday life to a dystopian nightmare. The streets of her town, once full of cars and pedestrians, now lay eerily silent. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, broken only by the occasional distant groan or crash. It was the sound of the undead. Sarah had been at home when the chaos erupted. A late-night news broadcast had warned of a virus spreading rapidly across the globe, but nothing had prepared her for the horror she was now facing. She had watched as her friends and neighbors transformed into ravenous monsters, their once human features twisted in grotesque forms, as the virus overtook them. They were no longer people, just mindless predators hunting anything that breathed. The first few hours had been chaotic. The streets were flooded with screams, and desperate people scrambled to escape. Sarah's family had been among them, but that was before they were separated. She hadn't seen them since. Now, she was alone. Completely alone. She had been hiding out in her house for the past day, trying to gather her bearings and figure out what to do next. It was quiet now, save for the occasional banging on the door or the slow shuffling of feet outside her window. Sarah had learned quickly that it wasn't just the zombies you had to fear, it was the people. The world had already begun to crumble, and in the absence of law and order, humanity's darkest tendencies began to surface. She had seen it firsthand when a group of survivors attempted to break into her home, only to be scared off by a well-placed shot from her father's hunting rifle. Since then, she hadn't dared leave. She needed food, water, and a plan. Sarah cautiously approached the window, peering through the blinds. The streets were still and empty, a ghostly reminder of what had been. She saw no movement, but she knew better than to assume it was safe. The undead were relentless, and they could strike at any moment. She tightened her grip on the knife she had found in her kitchen, a small, but effective weapon. The thought of facing the undead made her stomach churn, but she couldn't stay here forever. With a deep breath, she opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. The silence around her felt suffocating. The only sounds were the wind rustling through the trees and the distant groans that seemed to come from every direction. Her heart raced as she moved carefully down the steps, her eyes scanning the area for any sign of danger. As she crossed the yard, Sarah couldn't help but notice the remnants of life before the outbreak, a bicycle lying on its side, a set of children's toys scattered across the lawn, the faint scent of cooked food still lingering in the air. It was like stepping into a time capsule, a world that no longer existed. She reached the driveway, where her car was parked, but it was useless. Fuel was running low, and she couldn't risk driving through an area filled with undead. Besides, the roads were too unpredictable now. Her best chance for survival was on foot. Sarah had no destination in mind, just the vague notion that she needed to get out of the neighborhood and find some sort of refuge. She'd heard rumors of safe zones, but they seemed more like whispers than anything concrete. Who could you trust in a world like this? Everyone had their own survival to think of, and that often meant doing whatever it took to stay alive, even if it meant betraying others. The first decision was the hardest: which direction to go. Her instincts told her to head north, toward the mountains. She had read somewhere that there were fewer infected up there, but it was a gamble. The terrain would be harder, and the risk of running into hostile survivors was just as great as the threat of zombies. Still, it felt like the only choice. She couldn't stay here forever. The sun was low in the sky as Sarah began her journey. Every step felt heavier than the last, each crack of a twig underfoot sounding like a shout in the stillness. Her breath came in shallow gasps, a mixture of fear and exhaustion. She didn't know how far she could make it, but she had no choice but to keep going. The world around her was both hauntingly beautiful and terrifying. The sky above was a dull shade of gray, the clouds swirling in patterns that seemed almost unnatural. The trees that lined the streets stood as silent sentinels, their branches reaching out like skeletal arms. It was as if nature itself had changed in response to the apocalypse. Sarah walked for what felt like hours, her legs aching with every step. She was dehydrated, hungry, and mentally drained, but the fear of being caught by the undead pushed her forward. She couldn't let her guard down. She knew that all it would take was a moment of distraction for her to become another victim. As the sky darkened, Sarah found herself on the outskirts of town, far from the safety of her home. She paused, catching her breath and looking around for any sign of shelter. There was a gas station up ahead, a place where she might find supplies, but she was wary. What if there were survivors there? Would they be hostile? Or worse, what if the undead had already overrun the area? She had no way of knowing, but her options were running out. The world as she knew it had ended, and now she had to survive in a world where every decision could mean the difference between life and death. The gas station loomed ahead, its flickering neon lights casting a pale, unnatural glow across the desolate scene. The once bustling convenience store now appeared abandoned, with its windows dark and cracked. A rusted sedan sat in the parking lot, its front end slightly crumpled, as if it had been abandoned in haste. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she approached, her footsteps slow and deliberate. Every instinct told her to stay hidden, to keep moving, but the thought of supplies, water, food, maybe even a weapon, pushed her forward. Her eyes scanned the surrounding area. The pump islands, once busy with the noise of refueling cars, were eerily still. A few scattered cars were parked here and there, but there was no sign of life. No movement. The wind whispered through the cracks in the building, and the only sound was the occasional creak of a loose sign swaying in the breeze. Despite the calm, Sarah felt the weight of the tension in the air. She had been alone for too long, and the silence felt oppressive. She made her way toward the store's entrance, staying low and moving from cover to cover. The last thing she wanted was to stumble into a group of undead or hostile survivors. She had learned the hard way that trust was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. Even a simple wave or a smile from someone could be a prelude to betrayal or worse. In this new world, everyone was out for themselves. The sense of camaraderie and solidarity that once bound people together was long gone. When she reached the door, she hesitated. The handle was cracked, and she could see inside through the shattered glass. The aisles were in disarray, overturned shelves, scattered cans, and what appeared to be a bloodstain on the floor. She flinched at the sight, but it wasn't enough to turn her away. The gas station was her best shot at survival right now. Taking a deep breath, Sarah pushed the door open, the glass shards crunching underfoot. The dim interior was unnervingly quiet, the air stale and heavy. She gripped her knife tighter, prepared for whatever might be lurking inside. The overhead lights flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward her like grasping hands. Every noise felt amplified, the distant hum of the refrigerator units and the faint drip of water echoing through the space. She moved cautiously down the first aisle, her eyes darting from side to side, taking in every detail. She needed food and water, anything that would help her keep going. Her stomach growled painfully, but she ignored it for the moment, focusing on the task at hand. Her hands were already shaking with the anxiety of being in such a vulnerable position. As she turned the corner, she froze. The back of the store was open to a small storage room, where a few shelves still held supplies. But there, standing motionless in the middle of the room, was a figure. It was tall, hunched, and its clothes were ragged. The smell hit her immediately, rotting flesh and decay. It was a zombie, its face a twisted mask of hunger and malice. Its eyes were wide, unblinking, and it was staring directly at her. Her heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, she felt paralyzed. The only thing she could hear was the pounding of her own heartbeat in her ears. She had been lucky so far, avoiding direct encounters, but now the cold, harsh reality of her situation hit her like a punch to the gut. There was nowhere to run. Nowhere to hide. She was trapped. The zombie's groans grew louder, and it began to shuffle toward her, its movements slow but deliberate. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as her body responded instinctively. She backed away, but the floor creaked under her feet, alerting the creature to her position. It let out a guttural growl and lunged forward, faster than she had anticipated. In that moment, all the survival instincts Sarah had honed over the past days kicked in. She didn't think, she acted. With a swift motion, she pulled the knife from her side and slashed at the creature. The blade sunk deep into its shoulder, but it wasn't enough to stop it. The zombie was relentless, its teeth gnashing as it reached for her. Fear surged through Sarah's veins, but her mind remained focused. She couldn't afford to panic. She sidestepped its next lunge and brought the knife down again, this time aiming for its neck. The blade found its mark, and the creature crumpled to the floor with a sickening thud. For a moment, Sarah stood frozen, staring at the fallen zombie. It wasn't her first kill, but it was the first time she had been face to face with one of them. The reality of it hit her hard. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was killing to survive. Her legs felt weak beneath her, and she leaned against a nearby shelf to steady herself. She took a few deep breaths, trying to calm her racing heart. There was no time to waste. She had to keep moving. The storage room was small, and after the brief encounter, Sarah knew there was no safe place to hide here for long. She quickly grabbed a few bottles of water from the shelves and stuffed them into her backpack. She found some canned food, too, though she didn't have a can opener. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. As she turned to leave, something caught her eye. A small first aid kit was wedged between two crates, its red cross symbol barely visible in the dim light. Without hesitation, she grabbed it and added it to her pack. The supplies were minimal, but they were more than she had when she entered. Before she left the store, Sarah took one last look at the gas station. The silence outside was oppressive, and the weight of the world seemed to press down on her shoulders. There was no turning back now. She had made it this far, but she knew the hardest part of her journey was still ahead. Sarah stepped out of the gas station, her heart still racing from the encounter with the zombie. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The silence of the street was oppressive, and every step she took seemed to echo louder than the last. Her backpack felt heavier now, the supplies she'd gathered a small but crucial lifeline. Still, despite the victory of surviving the zombie inside the store, the thought of what lay ahead filled her with a growing sense of dread. She had no map, no clear direction. Her plan had been vague at best: head north, toward the mountains. But that was based on hearsay, rumors from other survivors she had overheard in the chaos of the early days. Who knew if those safe zones even existed? Or if they were really safe at all? In a world where the undead roamed the streets and every other survivor might be a potential threat, she couldn't afford to trust anyone, or anything, without proof. The sun was setting behind her, casting long shadows across the landscape. The sky, once a clear blue, was now a dull gray, thick clouds swirling in ominous patterns overhead. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the scent of decay and something else, a sharp, acrid stench that made her stomach churn. She didn't want to think about it. She couldn't. Ahead of her, the road stretched into the unknown, the streetlights flickering sporadically. They weren't much use anymore, the city's power grid failing as the infrastructure collapsed under the strain of the outbreak. It was an eerie reminder of how quickly everything could fall apart. Yesterday's world had been one of comfort and routine, where problems seemed trivial in comparison to what she was facing now. Today, every choice felt like a matter of life and death. Sarah kept moving, her footsteps steady but cautious. The constant need for vigilance had become second nature. She scanned every building, every alley, every car. Even the smallest movement made her freeze, her body tensing in anticipation of an attack. The undead could be anywhere, and she couldn't afford to let her guard down. After an hour of walking, Sarah found herself at the edge of town, where the buildings began to thin out and give way to open fields. She paused, looking back at the abandoned homes and businesses behind her. It had been a long time since she had seen any signs of life, but the quiet still unsettled her. The roads were empty, and the street corners were devoid of the familiar chatter and life that had once filled them. She needed rest, but the thought of stopping in such an exposed area made her nervous. Without shelter or cover, she would be vulnerable. There were too many unknowns. She had to find a safe place, even if it meant venturing farther into the wilderness. As she continued walking, the fields stretched out in front of her, an endless expanse of brown grass and scattered trees. The farther she moved, the less familiar the terrain became. She was outside her comfort zone now, and with each step, she realized how little she truly knew about the world beyond the city. A low growl snapped her back to attention. Her heart skipped a beat, and she froze. That noise had come from behind her, not far off. She turned slowly, scanning the distance, but saw nothing. The growl came again, closer this time. Her breath caught in her throat. The hair on the back of her neck stood on end. It wasn't a zombie. It was something else. From the trees on the outskirts of the field, a figure emerged, walking with a steady, predatory gait. It was tall and thin, wearing torn clothing, its face obscured by a hood. The figure didn't seem to be moving like a zombie. There was a purpose to its stride, a deliberate pace as it closed the distance between them. Sarah's hand instinctively went to the knife she had tucked into her belt. Was it another survivor? A threat? Her mind raced with possibilities. Had they been following her? Were they part of the small group of hostile survivors she'd heard rumors about? She took a step back, trying to put some distance between herself and the approaching figure. She had no way of knowing whether they were friend or foe, but in a world like this, it was better to assume the worst. As the figure got closer, Sarah's grip tightened on the knife. She could see the outline of a backpack, and what looked like a rifle slung over the person's shoulder. This wasn't just some scavenger. Whoever they were armed. A deep voice suddenly cut through the tension. "I don't want any trouble," the person called out, their tone low and steady. "Just looking for supplies, same as you." Sarah hesitated, unsure of whether to trust the stranger. She didn't answer right away, her mind running through every possibility. She had been alone for too long, and her sense of isolation had turned into a deep mistrust of others. But there was something about the way the figure spoke that didn't feel threatening. Maybe it was the calmness in their voice, or maybe it was the fact that they didn't rush toward her with the aggression she had come to expect from the undead. "Who are you?" Sarah asked, her voice sharp and cautious. "What do you want?" The figure paused, their eyes hidden beneath the hood, but they held their ground. "Just a fellow survivor," they said. "I've been traveling for days, just like you. Don't want to fight. Just need some food and water. Can we talk?" Sarah kept her distance, still skeptical. The last thing she wanted was to let her guard down. But something in the stranger's posture, in their voice, made her consider that they might not be the enemy. With a deep breath, she lowered the knife slightly but kept it ready. She'd learned the hard way that appearances could be deceiving. "Okay," she said, still unsure. "We can talk. But stay where I can see you." The figure nodded, their body language relaxing just slightly. "Fair enough," they replied. "The world's changed, hasn't it?" Sarah didn't answer right away. What could she say? In this new world, everything had changed, forever. She'd never been prepared for the devastation, the loss, and the constant fear. But one thing was certain, trust was no longer something to give freely. Every decision, every step she took, could be the last. The stranger took a few cautious steps forward, keeping his hands visible, the rifle now resting loosely against his shoulder. Sarah's eyes narrowed as she watched him, her thoughts racing. She'd survived this long by trusting no one, and here was a person, armed and potentially dangerous, trying to earn her trust with a few calm words. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to leave him behind, but another part of her, a quieter voice deep down, wondered if she might be able to learn something from him. She had no real plan, no clear idea of where she was going, but the world had a way of throwing unexpected situations her way. Maybe this encounter could be useful. Maybe it could help her survive a little longer. Taking a deep breath, Sarah gestured for the stranger to sit on the edge of the nearby road. "Fine," she said, her voice steady, though her fingers were still tight around the knife. "Let's talk. But if I feel threatened at any point, this conversation is over." The man nodded, his eyes focused on her with an intensity that spoke of survival. He sat down slowly, his body language relaxed but alert, and Sarah followed suit, though she kept a healthy distance between them. For a moment, there was an uncomfortable silence. Sarah couldn't help but feel the weight of the past days bearing down on her. She missed human contact, the sound of laughter, the presence of warmth, but that world was gone. Everyone she had known, everyone she had trusted, was either gone or turned. This new reality, where survival was the only currency, felt colder and more alien with each passing day. Finally, the stranger spoke, breaking the silence. "Name's Cole," he said, his voice calm but tinged with weariness. "Been surviving on my own for months now. I was part of a group at first, but people get desperate when food and water run out. Things got ugly." He trailed off, his gaze drifting as if lost in a memory. Sarah studied him carefully, but she didn't speak. She didn't need to. The tone in his voice said more than any explanation could. She had been through the same thing, trusting people who would just as easily betray you for a can of beans or a bottle of water. "People change," she said quietly. "When everything falls apart, there's no room for kindness. Only survival." She stared at the ground, the weight of her own words sinking in. Cole shifted, seeming to recognize the truth of her statement. "Yeah," he agreed softly. "But even now, it's hard to shake the instinct to help someone out. I guess I'm hoping to find a few more survivors, people who haven't completely given up yet." His eyes met hers. "If you're looking for a safe place, I might know one. It's a small community, people who've set up defenses, who are trying to make it work. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing." Sarah's heart skipped at the mention of a safe place. She had heard rumors of settlements, some more hopeful than others, but how could she know if they were real? How could she trust this man, Cole, when everyone she had ever trusted had either betrayed her or died? "You think I'm going to just follow you to some unknown group?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I don't know you. I don't know your community. For all I know, they could be worse than the zombies." Cole's expression softened. "I get it. Trust is a luxury no one has anymore. But I've seen what happens when people don't work together. It's a hell of a lot harder to survive alone than with a group of people who've got each other's backs." Sarah thought about that. She'd been surviving on her own for so long, each day a struggle to stay ahead of the undead, to find food, and to avoid becoming one of them. She had never been a part of a group after the outbreak. Her small circle of friends had disbanded early on, each person scattering in different directions. She hadn't wanted to risk the possibility of someone turning on her, of the group falling apart in the face of danger. But the thought of working with others, of having a small piece of normalcy in the midst of all the chaos, was undeniably appealing. "What makes you think your group is different?" she asked, still hesitant, but the possibility of hope, however slim, was starting to take root. Cole shrugged, his eyes hardening a little. "I'm not promising anything. People have their flaws, even the best of them. But there's strength in numbers. We protect each other. We have a system in place." He paused, his voice quieter now, as if speaking of something deeply personal. "I'm just trying to find something worth holding on to." There was a long pause as Sarah processed his words. Trust was the hardest thing to give in this new world, but Cole seemed different from the others she had encountered. He wasn't desperate in the way some people were, he wasn't pleading or manipulating her into joining him. He simply seemed tired, as though he'd been carrying the weight of the apocalypse alone for too long. Finally, Sarah spoke. "I'll come with you. But don't think for a second that I'm going to just follow you blindly. If your group tries anything, if anyone turns on me, I'll leave. And you won't even know I was here." Cole gave her a tight smile, nodding in agreement. "Fair enough," he said, standing up and adjusting his rifle. "Let's get moving, then. The longer we stay out here, the more danger we're in. And trust me, there's more than just zombies to worry about." Sarah stood up as well, grabbing her pack and adjusting the strap. As they began to walk together, side by side, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this was just the beginning of another dangerous chapter in her journey. But for the first time in a long while, she wasn't entirely alone. And that, she thought, was worth the risk. The sun dipped lower in the sky as Sarah and Cole made their way down the road. The landscape had changed once again, moving from the open fields to a stretch of forest that bordered the outskirts of the city. The trees stood tall and silent, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands, casting dark shadows over the path ahead. The world felt strangely still here, as though time itself had paused in the wake of the outbreak. "How far is this place?" Sarah asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. She didn't want to break the silence too much, but the question had been lingering in her mind for miles. Cole glanced over at her, his face unreadable. "A few more miles. If we move quickly, we should be there by dark." The thought of being close to a safe place, an actual community, made Sarah's stomach flutter with a mixture of hope and fear. She had no way of knowing if Cole's story was true. She had heard enough horror stories of so-called safe zones that turned out to be little more than death traps, places where the desperate did whatever it took to stay alive, no matter the cost. She glanced back at the road behind them, scanning the horizon. Even though the fields were vast, there was still that constant sense of danger, that awareness of the unknown lurking just out of sight. Zombies, hostile survivors, wild animals, and the ruthless weather, they were all enemies now. There was no room for complacency. "You said there were other survivors with your group," Sarah continued, trying to keep her mind occupied. "How many?" "Enough," Cole answered vaguely. "Not a huge group, but enough to make things work. We've got food, a way to defend ourselves, and people who know how to survive. We're not trying to build anything fancy, just a place where we can get by." He stopped for a moment, and Sarah could sense the weight of his words. "We're not perfect, but we're surviving." His honesty was oddly comforting, but it didn't quite ease her nerves. She had been alone for so long, relying only on herself to get by. The thought of depending on others was something she wasn't sure she was ready for. What if they couldn't be trusted? What if this whole community was just another trap? But then again, what other choice did she have? The world was a broken, desolate place, and trying to survive alone had taken its toll on her. Every day had been a gamble, every meal and every night a blessing, but also a potential disaster waiting to happen. They kept walking, their pace steady, the only sounds being the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. As they moved deeper into the forest, Sarah couldn't help but feel that they were being watched. Her instincts were still on high alert, the survivor in her unwilling to trust anyone fully. But Cole didn't seem to notice her unease, he just kept walking ahead, his rifle resting casually on his back. After a while, the forest began to thin out, and Sarah saw the faint outline of a building in the distance, a large, run-down structure that looked like it had once been a factory or a warehouse. The windows were boarded up, and the roof sagged in places, but it was the first sign of human habitation she had seen in days. Her heart skipped a beat. Could this really be it? Could this really be the safe place Cole had spoken of? They approached cautiously, and Sarah's eyes darted from side to side, scanning the surroundings for any signs of danger. But everything seemed eerily quiet. No movement, no voices, just the quiet rustling of trees in the wind. As they reached the entrance, a large metal gate came into view, its rusted bars forming a makeshift barrier. There was a small guard tower beside the gate, a figure standing watch with a rifle slung over their shoulder. They didn't move at first, just stared at Sarah and Cole, sizing them up from a distance. Cole raised his hand in a silent greeting. "It's us," he called out, his voice calm and steady. "I've got someone with me." The figure in the tower didn't respond immediately, and Sarah could feel the tension rising between them. She stood still, her body tense and ready for anything. The last thing she wanted was for things to turn violent. A few moments passed before the figure spoke, their voice muffled by the distance. "Who's the woman?" "This is Sarah," Cole replied. "She's a survivor. We've been traveling together for a while now. She's not a threat." The figure didn't move for another beat, and Sarah could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't want to fight her way into a place that was supposed to be a safe haven. She didn't want to become the enemy because someone didn't trust her. Finally, the figure lowered their rifle and disappeared into the tower. The gate creaked as it slowly began to open, the sound loud in the otherwise quiet forest. As the entrance cleared, Sarah saw a group of people waiting just inside, standing around a fire that flickered in the dimming light. "Welcome to our home," a woman's voice called out from the group. She was tall, with dark hair pulled into a tight braid, and her face was weathered, though there was a certain kindness in her eyes. "I'm Margot. You must be Sarah." Sarah hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward, glancing back at Cole for reassurance. He gave her a small nod, as if telling her it was okay. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly, her voice rough from the journey. "I didn't know where else to go." Margot smiled faintly. "You're not the first. And you won't be the last." She glanced around at the others. "We've got room for one more. We'll make sure you're taken care of." As Sarah stepped through the gate and into the group's camp, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of another trial. Was this truly a safe place, or was it just another illusion in a world where nothing could be trusted? She didn't know yet, but for the first time in days, she had a sense of something she had long been without: hope. But even hope could be dangerous in the wrong hands. Sarah spent the next few days adjusting to life in the makeshift settlement. The group, led by Margot, a no-nonsense woman with a quick wit, seemed mostly functional, but there was an underlying tension that Sarah couldn't quite shake. As she settled into one of the small cabins assigned to new arrivals, she began to notice the little things: the way people exchanged looks when certain names were mentioned, the soft murmurs that stopped when she entered the room, and the sharp glances exchanged between Margot and a few others. It was clear that this place was far from perfect. Despite the safety of the walls and the guarded entrances, it was still a community on the edge, struggling to maintain its fragile balance. Sarah had never been good at trusting others, but here, it felt even more necessary. People were surviving on what little they had, and any weakness could easily be exploited. On the third morning, after Sarah had finished her breakfast of stale bread and canned beans, she wandered toward the camp's outer perimeter. She had been instructed to stay within the boundaries for safety, but her curiosity, about the group, about this place, about the larger world, compelled her to take a look beyond the gates. As she walked along the dirt path, Cole appeared by her side. He had been keeping a watchful eye on her, though his presence had become more of a reassurance than a shadow. After the brief exchange they had shared about her arrival, Cole hadn't pressed her further. He seemed content to let her find her own place in the camp, but now, he was speaking up again. "You're not supposed to be out here alone," he said, his tone flat but not unkind. "The perimeter is safe, but there's always the risk of zombies or other survivors looking to cause trouble." "I won't stray far," Sarah said, her voice firm. "I just want to get a feel for the area. See where everything stands." Cole's expression softened. "I get it. You're trying to figure out if this place is worth your trust. And I don't blame you." He paused before adding, "Just be careful. Trust isn't something anyone can offer easily in this world." Sarah nodded, appreciating the honesty. But she couldn't help but wonder if Cole had his own reservations about the group. He had spoken of them with some degree of loyalty, but his words didn't always match the unease in his eyes. Was he truly content here, or was he just trying to survive as much as she was? As they walked, Sarah noticed a man near the edge of the camp, working on reinforcing one of the fences. His movements were quick and deliberate, and he looked almost mechanical in his precision. He had a grim expression on his face as he hammered a large nail into the wood, and his hands were rough, scarred by years of hard labor. "That's Theo," Cole said, following Sarah's gaze. "He handles a lot of the maintenance around here, making sure the defenses hold up. He's good at what he does, but he's a bit distant. Hasn't been the same since his brother disappeared." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Disappeared?" "Yeah," Cole replied. "A while back, a few of the group members went out on a supply run. They didn't come back. Theo's brother, Adam, was one of them." He looked away, a touch of sorrow in his voice. "Ever since then, Theo's been kind of off. He works non-stop, barely sleeps, and he doesn't talk much anymore." Sarah didn't say anything at first. She knew what it was like to lose someone in this world, the crushing, empty ache that seemed to grow with every passing day. But the difference between her and Theo was that she had learned to hide it. Theo wore his grief openly, and it was clear it was eating him from the inside out. "I'll keep my distance," Sarah muttered, turning her attention back to the perimeter. "If he doesn't want to talk, I'm not going to push him." "Good call," Cole said, though there was an unreadable expression on his face. "Just know that sometimes people like him, they don't stay quiet for long." As the day passed, Sarah's unease about the group only grew. The more she observed, the more she saw cracks in the facade. At dinner, Margot spoke about their efforts to rebuild, to bring in new supplies, and to strengthen their defenses. But the conversations always seemed to circle around the same few topics: resources, survival, and keeping outsiders away. It was clear that everyone was living in fear of the undead, fear of each other, and fear of what might happen if they let their guard down for even a second. After dinner, as the sun set behind the hills and the fire in the center of the camp crackled and popped, Sarah found herself sitting alone by the edge of the camp, staring out into the darkening woods. The warmth of the fire couldn't quite dispel the chill that had settled in her bones. There was something about the night that made the shadows feel deeper, more oppressive. "Hey," Cole's voice cut through the quiet, startling her. She hadn't realized he had come up behind her. "You all right?" Sarah didn't answer right away. She wasn't sure how to explain the feeling gnawing at her insides, the sense that something was wrong, that she was surrounded by people who were too tightly wound, too full of secrets, to ever truly trust. "I don't know," she admitted finally, her voice soft. "I keep thinking about the world outside. About what's waiting for us out there. And I'm not sure we're going to make it." Cole sat down beside her, his eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "I get it," he said quietly. "It's hard to see a way forward sometimes. But we've got each other. We've got a chance." Sarah wasn't sure if that was enough. What did a chance even mean in a world like this? A chance to survive? A chance to die a little slower? As the night deepened, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something more sinister was brewing beneath the surface of this camp. Whatever peace they had found here was fragile, teetering on the edge of collapse. She didn't know if she could rely on these people, but she had learned one thing in this apocalypse: survival didn't come from trusting others. It came from trusting yourself. And for the first time, Sarah realized that trust might be the hardest thing to hold on to in a world that had long since lost its humanity. The days began to blend together as Sarah grew more entrenched in the daily rhythm of life in the camp. The routine was simple but exhausting: gather what supplies they could from the surrounding area, reinforce the defenses, maintain the fire, and, most importantly, keep the undead at bay. The others in the camp were friendly enough, but Sarah had learned not to trust kindness too easily. There were too many ulterior motives, too many unsaid things lurking just beneath the surface. Cole, despite his outward calm, was becoming increasingly restless. His movements had started to show signs of fatigue, his eyes had that hollowed-out look that came from too many sleepless nights, and he wasn't eating as much. It was as if the burden of survival was slowly eating away at him, just as it had at everyone else. Sarah noticed it, though she didn't say anything. One morning, Sarah woke to the sound of raised voices. She stepped outside her cabin and saw a small crowd gathered near the edge of the camp. The usual quiet of the morning had been shattered, and the tension in the air was palpable. Margot was in the middle of the group, talking with Theo and a few others. "What's going on?" Sarah asked, her voice cautious as she approached. She could feel something was wrong. Cole stood by her side, watching the scene unfold with narrowed eyes. "We've got a problem," he muttered. "One of the supply runs didn't come back." Margot was shouting now, her hands gesturing wildly. "You're saying you can't get them back? What the hell happened, Theo?" Theo stood there, looking utterly defeated. "There were more of them. More zombies than we thought. We barely got out alive. And now they're surrounded." A wave of unease washed over Sarah. The group had always known that there was a constant risk when going out on supply runs, but the idea of an ambush so close to their home unsettled her. "We can't just leave them," Margot said, her voice strained. "They're part of the group. We need them back." I agree, Theo responded, his voice cold. But the numbers, we don't stand a chance. Not without more people. Are you saying we should just leave them to die? Margot snapped, her anger rising. I'm saying we have to think of the bigger picture. If we go out there, we risk everything, Theo argued, his voice cracking with frustration. The camp had become divided, with some pushing for a rescue mission and others, like Theo, arguing that it wasn't worth the risk. The group was too small to lose any more people, and the reality of what was at stake weighed heavily on them all. How many? Sarah spoke up before anyone else could. Her voice was steady, and for a moment, everyone turned to her. Theo gave her a hard look. 5. Maybe 6. She nodded, the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. She knew what it was like to be alone, and she knew that the people left behind could not be left to fend for themselves. Her instinct was clear. I'll go. What? Cole turned to her sharply. Sarah, you can't be serious. I am, she replied, her eyes meeting his. I've been out there. I've survived on my own before, and I can do it again. If I can get to them before the horde arrives, I'll bring them back. Margot stepped forward, studying her carefully. You're willing to risk your life for strangers? She asked, her voice laced with both admiration and skepticism. That's how it works now, doesn't it? Sarah said with a small, tight smile. Survival isn't just about looking out for yourself. It's about looking out for everyone else, too. Cole grabbed her arm before she could take a step. This is insane, Sarah. You don't know what you're walking into. We don't even have a proper plan. You'll be on your own. I'm not on my own, Sarah replied quietly. I have to try. And if I don't, I'll never forgive myself. Cole's face hardened, and he didn't let go of her arm right away. You're right about one thing, he said, his voice low and controlled. You don't come back from something like this unless you're ready to lose everything. Sarah took a deep breath, looking him in the eye. Then I guess I'll be ready. The decision was made. The plan was simple. She would leave at first light, head out toward the location of the supply run, and try to reach the others before the zombies did. The camp was already divided over the decision, but there was no time to waste. Every second mattered. The hours leading up to her departure were filled with silence. Everyone knew the risk, and no one seemed to know exactly what to say. Sarah packed a bag with essentials, water, a few canned goods, a knife, and a flare gun. She knew the odds weren't in her favor. But the people who had gone out on the run were more than just faces in the crowd. They were survivors, and she wasn't about to leave them behind. As the sun began to set, Sarah found herself standing at the edge of the camp, staring out into the dark wilderness ahead. Cole was there, watching her with an unreadable expression. I'll bring them back, she promised, not just to him, but to herself. Be careful, Cole said softly, his voice thick with unspoken emotion. And if you can, don't take any chances. Sarah nodded, then turned and walked into the growing darkness, her heart pounding with the knowledge that this was it, the moment where everything could change. As she stepped into the unknown, she couldn't shake the feeling that the real danger was still ahead of her, lurking in the shadows, just waiting for the right moment to strike. But she had made her choice. Now, she would see if the world would allow her to keep it. The journey out of the camp felt like walking through a fog of uncertainty. The air was thick with the remnants of the day's heat, and every rustling leaf or snap of a twig seemed to echo through the stillness of the wilderness. Sarah moved quickly but cautiously, her senses heightened with the knowledge that she was alone, and that the undead could be anywhere, waiting for the right moment to strike. She'd been on her own for days now, and while she had learned to live with the silence and solitude, it still weighed on her. The others back at camp had their own survival to think of, but for Sarah, it was more than that. This mission, this search for the others, was personal. It wasn't just about helping strangers, it was about proving something to herself. About showing that she still had a place in this world, even after everything that had been lost. The first few hours passed uneventfully, and Sarah began to feel a sense of cautious optimism. She knew the area from previous forays, and she was familiar with the terrain. Still, there was an undercurrent of dread. The further she went, the more it settled in her chest, a cold, unshakable feeling that something was watching her. By nightfall, Sarah had reached the general area where the supply run had gone missing. The landscape was barren here, the woods thinning out into a stretch of rocky ground with a few scattered trees. She crouched behind a large boulder and scanned the area. No movement. No sound. But she knew better than to let her guard down. There was a faint, distant noise, something like shuffling feet, dragging across the ground. Her heart stopped. Zombies. Instinctively, she crouched lower, pressing herself against the cold rock. She had learned the hard way that moving too quickly or making noise could get her killed. She waited, her breath shallow, trying to blend into the shadows. The noise grew louder, closer. Then, from the darkness, they appeared, two zombies, stumbling forward with the mindless determination that only the undead could possess. Their faces were distorted, hollowed-out remnants of whatever they had once been. Sarah's pulse quickened, and her grip tightened on the flare gun. But just as she was about to move, she heard voices, low, urgent whispers coming from behind the zombies. She peered around the rock, trying to stay hidden, and spotted figures crouching near a broken-down vehicle. They were alive. The missing supply team. But they were trapped. The zombies were too close. Sarah's mind raced. She had to act, and quickly. The flare gun was risky, but it was her best option for drawing attention away from the survivors. She aimed carefully at the cluster of trees behind the zombies, pulling the trigger. The flare shot through the air, its brilliant light illuminating the night for a split second, burning through the darkness. The zombies turned, attracted by the flash, their gaze fixed on the bright streak in the sky. The survivors took their chance. Two of them broke from their cover, sprinting toward the rocky outcropping where Sarah had been hiding. She motioned for them to follow her, her heart racing as she turned and led them into the shadows of the terrain. "Come on. Hurry," she hissed, adrenaline coursing through her veins. They ran, stumbling slightly but pushing through the fear. Behind them, the zombies began to shuffle in pursuit, drawn by the noise and the movement. Sarah didn't dare look back. She led them through the dark, down a narrow path she knew would take them to a ravine that would give them some temporary cover. As they reached the ravine, Sarah pushed the survivors into a narrow alcove formed by the jagged rocks. She held her breath, listening for the sound of the undead. They weren't far behind. The survivors, breathless and wide-eyed, huddled together in the dim light. "Are you crazy?" one of them asked, his voice shaky. "You could have gotten yourself killed." "I didn't," Sarah replied sharply, though her words didn't hold the usual conviction. "And I'm not done yet." The group stayed silent as the sounds of the zombies grew louder. Sarah's eyes darted between the shadows, watching for any sign of movement. The undead were close. Too close. The ravine offered them some cover, but it wasn't enough. The moment the zombies found them, they would be trapped. "I need a plan," Sarah thought aloud, her eyes scanning the area. "Do you have one?" a woman whispered from behind her, her voice trembling. "Not yet," Sarah said, more to herself than anyone else. "But I will." The first zombie appeared, staggering into view at the edge of the ravine. Its movements were slow, but it was relentless. The others weren't far behind. Sarah clenched her fists, her mind racing for a way out. "We can't outrun them," one of the survivors said quietly. "No," Sarah agreed, a grim resolve settling over her. "But we can fight." Without waiting for an answer, she grabbed a large, jagged rock from the ground and hurled it at the approaching zombie. The rock struck it squarely in the face, knocking it off balance. The creature staggered, but then it lurched forward again, more determined than ever. Sarah's plan was simple: draw their attention away from the survivors, buy them enough time to make a run for it. She grabbed a second rock and threw it, but this time, she aimed for the group's weak spot, their desperation. The flare gun was still tucked in her belt, but it was a last resort. The zombies were closer now. There was no more time for hesitation. "On my signal, you run." I'll cover you." Without waiting for an answer, she sprinted toward the zombies, drawing their attention with every movement. She ducked low, weaving between the undead, dodging their outstretched hands. The flare gun was in her hand now, ready to fire. At the last possible moment, Sarah turned and fired the flare gun into the air. The bright light illuminated everything in a fiery explosion of color, and for just a moment, the zombies were distracted. The survivors took their chance. They ran. The moment stretched into eternity as Sarah watched them disappear into the distance. But she didn't wait. The flare gun was gone, and she was alone again, facing the creatures that wanted nothing more than to feast on her flesh. And she was ready. This was it. The final stand. No more running. The fight for survival had come full circle.